Part 1. The Illusion of Glass. The rain in Seattle always had a way of washing the color out of the world, leaving behind a canvas of muted grays and cold blues. Elias stood by the window of his modest suburban home, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. He was a quiet man, 34 years old, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and worn denim. To the outside world, and more importantly, to his wife Vanessa, he was just Elias, a mid-level data analyst who worked remotely, barely scraping together a low six-figure salary. Comfortable, but thoroughly unremarkable. Vanessa, on the other hand, was a creature of gold and velvet. She walked into the living room, the sharp clack of her Christian Louboutin heels striking the hardwood floor like a metronome of impending doom. She wore a sleek, crimson cocktail dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her dark hair cascading in carefully sculpted waves. The scent of Baccarat Rouge 540 preceded her, heavy and expensive. "I'm going out with the girls," she announced, not bothering to look at him as she adjusted her diamond earrings in the hallway mirror. Elias didn't turn around. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice even betraying nothing. "Yes, Elias. Clara got a promotion, so we're celebrating at the Sterling Club. Don't wait up." She finally shot him a glance, her eyes sweeping over his faded flannel with barely concealed disdain. "And please, if the landlord calls about the plumbing, handle it. I can't deal with domestic issues right now." "Of course," Elias said softly. He watched her reflection in the window as she grabbed her clutch and walked out the front door. A few seconds later, the low, throbbing purr of a V12 engine echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Elias watched as a sleek, silver Bentley Continental pulled up to the curb. It wasn't Clara. It was Julian. Julian Vance was everything Vanessa had always wanted, and everything she constantly reminded Elias he was not. Julian was white, impossibly wealthy, heir to a real estate and tech venture capital empire, and undeniably flashy. He was the kind of man who wore bespoke Tom Ford suits to casual brunches, and tipped with crisp $100 bills. Elias watched as Vanessa slipped into the passenger seat, leaning over to kiss Julian lingeringly on the mouth. They didn't even care to hide it anymore. The Bentley pulled away, its taillights bleeding into the rainy night. Elias remained at the window for a long time. There was no anger in his chest, no shattered heart, no desperate tears. Instead, there was a profound, chilling emptiness, the kind of absolute zero calm that precedes a catastrophic storm. The anatomy of a betrayal. They had met 5 years ago at a charity gala. Elias had been wearing a rented tuxedo, playing the part of a +1 to a former colleague. Vanessa had been drawn to his quiet confidence, his sharp intellect, and the way he listened to her. Back then, she claimed she was tired of the shallow men in her social circles. She wanted stability. She wanted real love. But people change, or perhaps they just reveal who they truly are. As the years passed, Vanessa's hunger for status grew. She began to resent their 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. She resented his 10-year-old Honda Civic. She resented his apparent lack of ambition. "Why don't you ask for a promotion, Elias?" she would snap over dinner. "Julian just closed a $40 million deal, and you're still crunching numbers for a middle management salary." Julian had entered their lives 6 months ago at a country club mixer Vanessa had begged Elias to attend. Elias remembered the exact moment Julian's eyes locked onto Vanessa. He also remembered the exact moment Vanessa's moral compass shattered. What Vanessa didn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom, was that Elias was not a data analyst. He walked away from the window and headed down the hallway, stepping into his small, cluttered home office. He locked the door behind him, placed his thumb against a biometric scanner hidden beneath the rim of his wooden desk, and waited. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a sleek, obsidian black laptop that bore no brand logo. Elias opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, asking for a sequence of biometric and encrypted key passcodes. He typed with lightning speed. "Welcome back, Mr. Thorne." Elias Thorne. That was his real name. He was not a mid-level employee. He was the founder and absolute majority shareholder of Aegis Global, a shadow conglomerate that owned a terrifying percentage of the world's logistics, raw materials, and venture capital firms. He was a phantom billionaire, a man who had erased his public footprint entirely a decade ago after a vicious corporate war that almost cost him his life. He lived in the shadows by choice, valuing privacy and peace over the toxic glare of Forbes lists and high society galas. He had married Vanessa hoping to find a grounded, normal life. He had wanted to be loved for him, not for his godlike net worth. He pulled up a secure dashboard. On the screen, a series of live feeds and data logs appeared. He had known about Julian and Vanessa for 4 months. As a man who controlled global information networks, it had taken him exactly 3 seconds to flag Julian Vance's background. Elias opened a specific file labeled Vance_Capital. Julian's entire wealth was built on leverage. His company, Vance Tech Ventures, was highly leveraged, propped up by a massive line of credit from a parent firm called Obsidian Asset Management. Elias stared at the screen, a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. Obsidian Asset Management was a subsidiary of Aegis Global. Julian Vance's entire empire was essentially owned by the quiet man in the flannel shirt. The eviction. It was 2 a.m. when the front door slammed open. Elias was sitting in the dark living room, sipping a glass of cheap bourbon. The rain was still falling. Vanessa stumbled in, laughing loudly, holding a pair of Julian's expensive suit jackets over her shoulders to shield herself from the rain. Julian was right behind her, smelling of expensive scotch and arrogant entitlement. When Vanessa saw Elias sitting in the armchair, she didn't even flinch. The alcohol had washed away the last remnants of her guilt. "Oh, you're awake," she slurred, flicking on the harsh overhead light. Elias squinted but didn't move. Julian stepped forward, assessing Elias with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "Look, mate. It's late, and this is awkward. Why don't you go upstairs?" Elias took a slow sip of his bourbon. "This is my house, Julian. I don't recall inviting you in." Vanessa crossed her arms, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Actually, Elias, it's my name on the lease. You just pay the rent." "Barely." She walked over to him, looking down at him as if he were an insect. "I'm done, Elias. I'm so incredibly done with you, this cheap house and this pathetic, mediocre life." Elias looked at her. "You're kicking me out? At 2 in the morning?" "Julian is buying me a penthouse downtown," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with venomous pride. "He's a real man. He knows how to treat a woman. You're just a ghost. You do nothing, you are nothing. I want you out. Tonight." Julian smirked, pulling a custom leather wallet from his jacket. He extracted a thick stack of $100 bills and tossed them onto the coffee table. The bills scattered over the cheap wood. "Here," Julian said condescendingly. "Get yourself a decent hotel for the week. Take your time packing tomorrow when we aren't here. But tonight, grab a bag and leave." Elias stared at the money. A few $1,000s. Pocket change to Julian. A rounding error in a microsecond of interest for Elias. Elias slowly stood up. He was a few inches taller than Julian, his broad shoulders suddenly making the small living room feel incredibly claustrophobic. Julian instinctively took a half step back, sensing an unexpected, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. But Elias didn't yell. He didn't throw a punch. He simply looked at Vanessa. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Vanessa? Once I walk out that door, there is no coming back. The bridge will be burned to ash." Vanessa rolled her eyes, laughing harshly. "Oh, please. Don't be dramatic. What are you going to do? Cut off my Netflix subscription? Pack your bags, Elias. We're over." Elias held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. He saw the greed, the superficiality, the absolute lack of remorse. The woman he had loved was dead, replaced by this stranger intoxicated by the illusion of someone else's wealth. "Very well," Elias said softly. He walked past them, ignoring Julian completely, and went into the bedroom. He didn't pack much. A few changes of clothes, some basic toiletries, and the black, unmarked laptop from his hidden safe. He left the cheap watch Vanessa had bought him for their anniversary on the nightstand. He left the wedding ring right beside it. When he returned to the living room, Vanessa and Julian were pouring themselves drinks from Elias's modest liquor cabinet. "Take the money, Elias," Vanessa said, pointing at the table. "You'll need it." Elias looked at the cash, then at Julian. "Keep it, Julian," Elias said, his voice carrying a strange, chilling weight. "You're going to need every single cent of it very, very soon." Julian scoffed. Sure thing, buddy. Enjoy the rain. Elias walked out the front door, pulling the collar of his jacket up against the cold Seattle downpour. He heard the deadbolt slide into place with a loud final click behind him. The awakening of a titan. Elias walked 3 blocks in the pouring rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't look back at the suburban house. That life was a closed chapter, an experiment in normalcy that had failed spectacularly. He stopped under the yellow glow of a flickering streetlight. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a heavy satellite-encrypted smartphone. It was a device that didn't exist on any commercial market, untraceable by any government. He dialed a single-digit number. It rang exactly half a time before a crisp, British voice answered. Sir, it has been 3 years since you used this line. Is everything all right? Hello, Marcus, Elias said, staring out into the dark street. The sabbatical is over. I require a pickup. Location, sir? Elias rattled off the cross streets. We will be there in 3 minutes. Shall I prep the penthouse at the Aegis Tower? Yes, Elias said. And Marcus? Yes, Mr. Thorne. I need you to pull the complete financial dossier on a man named Julian Vance. He runs Vance Tech Ventures. Our subsidiary, Obsidian Asset Management, holds his debt. I have his file loading now, sir. What are your orders? Elias watched a drop of rain fall from the streetlight, plunging into the dark puddles below. His eyes were cold, calculating, entirely devoid of the mild-mannered husband he had pretended to be for 5 years. Initiate a hostile takeover, Elias commanded softly. Call in all his margins. Freeze his lines of credit. Buy out his board members. By the time the stock market opens on Monday, I want Julian Vance liquidated. I want his empire burned to the ground, salted, and handed to me on a flash drive. Understood, sir. It shall be done. And what of your domestic situation? Vanessa has made her choice, Elias said, stepping off the curb as 2 massive matte black armored SUVs rounded the corner, their headlights cutting fiercely through the rain. Let her have him. We'll see how much she loves him when he has nothing left. The lead SUV pulled up to the curb. A man in a tailored black suit stepped out into the rain, holding an umbrella, opening the rear door for Elias. Elias tossed his cheap duffel bag into the trunk and slid into the luxurious leather-scented interior of the vehicle. As the heavy armored door slammed shut, sealing him away from the cold, the illusion of Elias the poor, struggling husband vanished forever. The phantom billionaire had returned, and hell was coming with him. Part 2. The Sunday illusion and the Monday avalanche. The weekend passed in a blur of champagne, silk sheets, and the intoxicating thrill of new wealth for Vanessa. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, the Seattle rain having washed the city clean, leaving behind a brilliant azure sky. Vanessa stood on the expansive balcony of a $20 million penthouse in the heart of downtown, a crystal flute of mimosa in her manicured hand. The view was breathtaking. The Space Needle to her left, the shimmering expanse of the Puget Sound directly ahead. This was it. This was the life she was owed. Julian stepped out onto the terrace, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He wore a plush monogrammed robe, his blonde hair perfectly tousled. He kissed the curve of her neck. Do you like it? He murmured, his voice rich with arrogant satisfaction. It's perfect, Julian, Vanessa sighed, leaning back into him. I can't believe it's going to be ours. I told my broker to finalize the paperwork tomorrow morning, Julian said, taking a sip of his own drink. By tomorrow afternoon, the keys are yours. We'll hire that interior designer from Milan you liked. Gut the whole place, start fresh. Vanessa turned in his arms, smiling radiantly. You are incredible. You know that? You make things happen. You're a real man. She let the words hang in the air, a deliberate comparison. Julian chuckled, his ego stroked exactly the way he liked it. Speaking of which, Julian said, a smirk playing on his lips, have you heard from the ex? Has the sad little data analyst come crawling back to beg for forgiveness yet? Vanessa rolled her eyes, taking another sip of her mimosa. Please. Elias doesn't have the spine to beg. He probably found a cheap motel near the airport and is sitting there feeling sorry for himself. He always was a coward, content with mediocrity. I wasted 5 years waiting for him to wake up and take charge of his life. I'm just glad I finally cut the dead weight. Julian kissed her forehead. You don't ever have to think about him again, babe. You're in the major leagues now. He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a heavy, sleek black titanium credit card. He slipped it between her fingers. Go have fun today. Buy whatever you want for the new place. Or just buy yourself some shoes. Consider it a welcome to the good life gift. Vanessa's eyes widened as she looked at the Centurion card. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him deeply. She was completely oblivious to the fact that miles away, in a tower that pierced the clouds, the gears of a merciless machine had already begun to turn. High above the financial district, the Aegis Tower stood as a monolithic testament to power. It was a skyscraper composed of dark, polarized glass and black steel, unmarked by any corporate logo. On the top floor, Elias Thorne stood by floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city. The faded flannel shirt was gone. In its place, he wore a bespoke charcoal, three-piece suit cut from Super 180s wool, paired with a crisp white shirt and a slate-gray silk tie. His posture had transformed. The slight, unassuming slouch he had adopted for the past 5 years had vanished, replaced by the rigid, predatory stillness of an apex predator. The heavy mahogany doors to his office opened, and Marcus stepped in. Marcus was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, carrying a sterling silver tray with a demitasse of black espresso and a secure biometric tablet. Good morning, sir, Marcus said, setting the tray on Elias's massive obsidian desk. The board of Aegis Global sends their regards and welcomes you back from your sabbatical. Thank you, Marcus, Elias replied, turning away from the window. He picked up the espresso, the dark, bitter liquid matching his mood. Give me the status report on Vance Tech Ventures. Marcus tapped the tablet, projecting a holographic display onto the center of the desk. Complex financial webs, stock tickers, and corporate hierarchies glowed in a crisp blue light. Julian Vance is a fool, sir, Marcus began, his British accent dripping with professional disdain. His entire net worth is an illusion built on leveraged debt. He used his company's shares as collateral to secure a massive line of credit from Obsidian Asset Management to fund his aggressive real estate acquisitions. He is currently leveraged at a ratio of 9-to-1. Elias took a slow sip of his espresso. He built a castle on quicksand. And we own the quicksand. Precisely, sir. Over the weekend, per your orders, we initiated a deep forensic audit of Vance Tech Ventures. We found 3 microscopic violations of his debt covenants, minor liquidity dips that usually go ignored. However, legally, it grants Obsidian Asset Management the right to call in the entire debt immediately. How much? Elias asked softly. $450 million, sir. Due in full immediately. Elias set the cup down. And his personal assets? Tied up in the company. To maintain his lavish lifestyle, he cross-collateralized his personal accounts, his vehicles, and his current real estate holdings against the firm's valuation. If the firm defaults, he loses everything, Elias finished. A cold, terrifying smile touched his lips. Trigger it, Marcus. Monday morning is about to begin. Let's welcome Mr. Vance to the major leagues. Monday, 8:45 a.m. Julian Vance strutted into the gleaming, ultramodern headquarters of Vance Tech Ventures. He was wearing a navy blue Tom Ford suit, a Rolex Daytona gleaming on his wrist. He tossed his keys to the receptionist and grabbed a green juice from the complimentary bar. Morning, Sarah, Julian said breezily. Tell David I need him in my office in 10 minutes to go over the final wire transfer for the penthouse. Sarah, the receptionist, looked pale. She wasn't smiling. Mr. Vance, David is already in your office. He's been here since 6 in the morning. He said it's an absolute emergency. Julian frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. David was his chief financial officer, a brilliant but perpetually anxious man. Julian hated dealing with anxiety. It ruined his vibe. Julian pushed open the heavy glass doors to his corner office. David was pacing behind the desk, his tie undone, his hair disheveled. The moment he saw Julian, he rushed forward, clutching a stack of papers. Julian! Thank God! David gasped, his voice trembling. We have a catastrophic situation. I mean, catastrophic. Julian walked over to his desk, casually sitting down and putting his feet up. Relax, Dave. Did a server crash? Did a startup we backed go under? It's just money. Breathe. No, Julian, you don't understand, David said, slamming the papers onto the desk. Obsidian Asset Management just called our debt. All of it. Julian froze. His feet slowly slid off the desk. What? That's impossible. We have a 5-year term sheet. They can't just call it. They can, and they did, David said, wiping sweat from his forehead. They found a technical violation in our liquidity ratios from Q2. It's a standard covenant clause. Normally nobody enforces it unless the company is failing. But Obsidian triggered the nuclear option at 8 a.m. today. They issued a formal demand letter. They want $450 million transferred to their holding accounts within 48 hours, or they seize our collateral. Julian's heart skipped a beat, but his arrogance quickly smothered the panic. This is a mistake. A clerical error by some mid-level risk manager at Obsidian. Get their CEO on the phone. I'll smooth this over. I golf with these guys. Julian. David's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. I tried. I spent the last 2 hours calling every contact we have at Obsidian. Nobody is answering. Our account manager's number is disconnected. The regional director's assistant told me they are acting on direct orders from their parent company. Julian frowned. Parent company? Who owns Obsidian? Aegis Global. David swallowed hard. Julian's blood ran cold. Everyone in the financial world knew the name Aegis Global, even though no one knew who actually ran it. It was a shadow titan, an apex predator that devoured corporations and manipulated global markets from behind a curtain of impenetrable secrecy. They didn't make mistakes. If Aegis Global was moving against you, it was an execution, not an error. Why? Julian whispered, the first true spike of terror piercing his chest. Why would Aegis Global care about a mid-tier venture firm like us? We aren't even on their radar. I don't know, David said, his voice cracking. But Julian. It gets worse. Julian stared at him, feeling the room begin to spin. How could it possibly get worse? Because the word got out. David pointed a shaking finger at the Bloomberg terminal on Julian's desk. Aegis leaked the margin call to the press 10 minutes ago. Look at our stock. Julian spun his chair around to face the monitors. His eyes locked onto the ticker symbol for Vance Tech Ventures. The graph was a sheer vertical red cliff. Panic selling had triggered automated algorithms. The stock had plummeted 40% in the first 10 minutes of trading. As Julian watched frozen in horror, it dropped another 12%. Our valuation is vaporizing, David whispered. Julian, the collateral you put up. If the stock drops below $15 a share, your personal cross-collateralization clause kicks in. They don't just take the company. They take your personal bank accounts. They take your assets. Julian stared at the red line, watching his life's work, his entire identity, burn to ashes in real time. He picked up his desk phone with trembling hands. Get me my lawyers, Julian barked, his voice laced with pure panic. Get every shark we have on retainer. Sue them for breach of contract. File for an injunction, do something. I called them, David said, looking like a man about to face a firing squad. Julian, our lead counsel at Sterling & Croft. They dropped us as clients this morning. Aegis Global put them on a conflict of interest retainer over the weekend. Julian dropped the phone. It clattered against the mahogany desk. He was completely trapped. An invisible, omnipotent God had descended from the heavens specifically to crush him, and he had absolutely no idea why. At 1 p.m., Vanessa was in her element. She was standing in the VIP lounge of the Chanel boutique on Fifth Avenue, sipping complimentary champagne. A tailored personal shopper named Henri was displaying a line of exclusive, diamond-quilted lambskin bags on a velvet table. Vanessa felt like royalty. This was where she belonged. Not in a drab suburban kitchen arguing with Elias about the electricity bill, but here surrounded by luxury, funded by a man who actually had power. I'll take the classic flap in black and the boy bag in emerald, Vanessa said dismissively, waving her hand. Oh, and the tweed jacket we looked at earlier. Wrap them up. An excellent choice, madam, Henri purred, bowing slightly. The total comes to $28,400. How would you like to handle this? Vanessa smirked. opening her designer clutch. She pulled out the heavy, black Centurion card Julian had given her and placed it on the silver tray. Put it on this. Henri took the card with a practiced smile and walked over to the sleek, hidden terminal. Vanessa took another sip of champagne, already imagining how the emerald bag would look against her new penthouse view. A minute later, Henri returned. His professional smile was strained, his eyes avoiding hers. I apologize, madam, Henri said softly, keeping his voice down to avoid a scene. But the card has been declined. Vanessa frowned, lowering her champagne flute. Excuse me? That's a Centurion card. There is no limit. You must have swiped it wrong. Try it again. I have tried it 3 times, madam. The terminal is returning a specific error code. The account has been frozen by the issuing bank. Vanessa felt a flush of hot embarrassment creep up her neck. A few wealthy women browsing nearby had paused, their ears clearly perking up at the word declined. That's impossible, Vanessa hissed, snatching the card back. My fiancé is Julian Vance. He is a billionaire. There must be a fraud alert because of the amount. I'll call him. She pulled out her iPhone and dialed Julian's number. She expected him to pick up immediately, to apologize, to scream at the bank and fix it. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. Vanessa's frown deepened. She dialed again. This time he answered on the second ring. Julian. Vanessa snapped, keeping her voice low but furious. I am at Chanel and your card just declined. It is incredibly embarrassing. Call your concierge and get the freeze lifted immediately. There was silence on the other end. Then she heard a sound she had never heard from Julian before. He was breathing heavily, a ragged, hyperventilating sound. Julian? Are you listening to me? Vanessa. Julian's voice was completely hollow, stripped of all its usual arrogance. He sounded like a broken man. Vanessa, you need to come to the office. Now. What? No, I have an appointment at the interior designer studio in an hour for the penthouse. Just fix the card. There is no penthouse, Vanessa. Julian suddenly screamed, the raw terror in his voice making her flinch. There is no card. The money is gone. It's all gone. Vanessa stood frozen in the middle of the boutique, the champagne suddenly tasting like acid in her mouth. What do you mean it's gone? Julian, you're not making sense. My accounts are frozen. The company stock crashed. The bank is repossessing the Bentley, Julian rambled, sounding utterly hysterical. Someone is hunting me, Vanessa. Someone bought my debt, and they are liquidating me. I have nothing. I'm bankrupt. The phone slipped from Vanessa's ear, hanging loosely in her hand. The world around her seemed to slow down. Henri, the personal shopper, was looking at her with a mixture of pity and polite impatience. Will there be another form of payment, madam? Henri asked gently. Vanessa stared at him, her face completely pale. She had left her stable, boring husband less than 48 hours ago to step into an empire of gold. And now the empire was dissolving into dust before she could even claim her throne. Little did she know, the true architect of her nightmare was currently sitting in a penthouse suite miles above the city, watching a red line on a screen plummet to zero, and taking a calm, satisfied sip of his espresso. The phantom had only just begun to play. Part 3. The crumbling castle. The sleek, glass-paneled lobby of Vance Tech Ventures, usually a humming hive of aggressive ambition and arrogant wealth, looked like the deck of a sinking ship. When Vanessa rushed through the revolving doors, completely ignoring the bewildered security guards, she was met with a scene of absolute, unmitigated chaos. Employees were frantically shoving personal belongings into cardboard boxes. Phones rang incessantly, their shrill tones echoing through the cavernous space, completely ignored by the panicked staff. The digital ticker tape that ran along the ceiling, which usually displayed the triumphant rise of Julian's tech portfolio, was a blinding, flashing stream of red numbers. Vanessa bypassed the reception desk and practically ran down the glass corridor toward Julian's corner office. She pushed the heavy door open and stopped dead in her tracks. The office looked as though a hurricane had ripped through it. Files and financial printouts were scattered across the floor like dead leaves. David, the CFO, was slumped in one of the designer chairs, his face buried in his hands, quietly weeping. And Julian, the golden boy of Seattle's real estate and tech scene, was standing behind his desk, tearing through drawers with the frantic, disjointed movements of a trapped animal. He was sweating profusely, his expensive Tom Ford suit jacket discarded on the floor, his silk tie loosened and askew. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning on the balcony of the penthouse. "Julian!" Vanessa cried out, her voice cracking as she stepped over a pile of shredded documents. "Julian, what is happening? The people outside. The phones." Julian froze, his bloodshot eyes darting toward her. The arrogance that usually defined his features had been completely hollowed out, replaced by raw, primal terror. "Vanessa!" he croaked, leaning heavily against his mahogany desk. "It's over. It's all over." "What do you mean it's over?" she demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. She clutched her Chanel purse, the old one, the one she hadn't been able to replace, to her chest. "You're a billionaire. You have assets, you have properties. You can't just lose everything in a few hours. You don't understand how this works," Julian suddenly screamed, slamming his fist onto the desk so hard a crystal whiskey decanter rattled. Vanessa flinched, taking a step back. She had never seen him lose control. Julian took a ragged breath, running trembling hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Ruining it. I don't own the money, Vanessa. I leverage it. I borrow against what I have to buy more. It's a house of cards. And Aegis Global just pulled the bottom card out." Julian let out a hollow manic laugh. "They didn't just margin call the firm. They went after the cross-collateral clauses. They froze my personal accounts. The bank just called. They canceled the escrow on the penthouse. The deal is dead." Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face. The $20 million view, the Milanese interior designer, the life of absolute luxury she had tasted that very morning. It was evaporating before her eyes like a mirage. But the Bentley," Vanessa stammered, clinging to any shred of the wealth she had traded her marriage for. "You own the cars." Julian looked at her, his eyes dead. "I lease the cars through the firm. The firm is currently in default. Aegis sent a seizure order to the leasing company 20 minutes ago. The repo men are probably in the parking garage right now." As if on cue, Julian's desk phone chimed. It was the security desk downstairs. Julian hit the speaker button with a shaking finger. "Mr. Vance," the guard's voice crackled, sounding deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, there are 2 gentlemen down here with a flatbed tow truck. They have a court order for the silver Bentley and the Range Rover." I didn't know what to do, sir. They have police escorts." Julian stared at the phone. He didn't answer. He just reached over and ripped the phone cord out of the wall. Vanessa sank into a leather guest chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "Julian, what are we going to do?" "I kicked Elias out. I told the landlord we were breaking the lease. I have nowhere to go." Julian let out a bitter, mocking scoff. "You have nowhere to go? I am about to be indicted. Aegis Global didn't just ruin me financially. They triggered a forensic audit by the SEC. They are going to look into every inflated valuation, every leveraged loan. I'm not just broke, Vanessa. I am going to federal prison." The gravity of the situation finally crushed the last of Vanessa's delusions. She looked at the man she had destroyed her marriage for. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was a fraud. A scared, weak man who had played a high-stakes game with someone else's money and lost spectacularly. Just then, the heavy glass doors of the office swung open again. It wasn't an employee. It was a man in a flawless, tailored black suit. He wore a crisp white shirt and a black tie, and his posture was impossibly rigid. He looked entirely out of place amidst the chaos of the ruined office. He carried a single thick envelope sealed with black wax. "Julian Vance?" the man asked, his voice calm, carrying a faint British accent. Julian swallowed hard, taking a step back. "Who are you?" "My name is Marcus. I represent the office of the CEO at Aegis Global." David, the weeping CFO, suddenly stopped crying and looked up, his face pale with awe and terror. Aegis Global was a myth. Their representatives didn't just walk into offices. Julian's posture shifted, a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes. If they sent an emissary, it meant they wanted to talk. It meant he could negotiate. He could beg. "Yes," Julian said, straightening his ruined tie. "Yes, I'm Julian. What do you want?" Marcus stepped forward and placed the heavy envelope on the mahogany desk. My employer has watched the events of the morning with great interest. He believes that the liquidation of your empire has proceeded efficiently. However, he is willing to offer you a single, brief audience to discuss the final terms of your firm's absorption. Julian lunged for the envelope, tearing it open. Inside was a heavy card made of matte black titanium. It had a time, 3 p.m., and an address: the Aegis Tower. He wants to see me? Julian breathed, a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. He wants to negotiate. David, did you hear that? He wants to talk. Marcus looked at Julian with an expression of absolute, chilling indifference. I would not use the word negotiate, Mr. Vance. My employer does not negotiate. He dictates. You are expected at 3 o'clock precisely. Do not be late. Marcus turned on his heel and walked out of the office, disappearing into the chaotic frenzy of the floor. Julian turned to Vanessa, his eyes wild with desperate energy. He grabbed her by the shoulders. Vanessa, you have to come with me. You have to. Vanessa recoiled. Me? Why? I don't know anything about finance, Julian. Because you're beautiful. Because you know how to charm people. Julian practically begged, his fingers digging into her arms. These guys, these ultra-billionaires, they're all ego. If we go in there together, if we grovel, if we play the part. Maybe he'll let me keep a subsidiary. Maybe he'll restructure the debt. Please, Vanessa. You have to help me sell this. If I go down, you go down. Vanessa looked into his terrified, pleading eyes. She thought about her empty bank account. She thought about Elias, who was probably laughing at her right now from some cheap motel room. She had burned her safety net to the ground. Julian was the only lifeboat left, even if it was sinking. Okay, Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. Okay, I'll go with you. The ascent to Olympus. The Aegis Tower was a monolith of dark glass that seemed to swallow the afternoon sunlight, rather than reflect it. Standing at the base of the skyscraper, Vanessa felt incredibly small. The anxiety gnawing at her stomach had morphed into a cold, heavy dread. They had taken an Uber to the building because Julian's cars were gone. Julian had spent the entire ride obsessively smoothing his hair and muttering pitches under his breath, practicing how he would beg for his financial life. They walked through the massive revolving doors into a lobby that looked like a modern art museum. Black marble floors, soaring ceilings, and absolute pristine silence. There were no bustling crowds, no ringing phones. Just armed security personnel in tailored suits who watched them with predatory stillness. Marcus was waiting for them by a bank of private, unmarked elevators. Mr. Vance. Madam, Marcus said, offering a curt nod. Right on time. Follow me, please. He ushered them into an elevator clad in brushed steel and dark wood. There were no buttons. Marcus placed his hand flat against a biometric scanner, and the elevator immediately began to ascend at a stomach-dropping speed. Vanessa clutched her Chanel purse, her knuckles turning white. She looked at Julian. He was sweating again, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might shatter. Who is he? Julian whispered to Marcus as the floors blurred past. The CEO. Who am I meeting? Marcus didn't turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on the silver doors. You are meeting the architect of your ruin, Mr. Vance. That is all you need to know. The elevator smoothly decelerated and came to a silent halt. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. They stepped out into a space that defied comprehension. The entire top floor of the skyscraper was a single sprawling office suite. The floor was made of polished obsidian. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of Seattle, the city sprawling out below them like a miniature playset. The walls were lined with rare books and abstract art. At the far end of the room, positioned perfectly against the backdrop of the skyline, was a massive desk carved from a single slab of petrified wood. A man was standing with his back to them, looking out the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit that radiated quiet, terrifying authority. Wait here, Marcus murmured, stepping aside and gesturing for them to move toward the center of the room. Julian swallowed audibly. He stepped forward, pulling Vanessa along by the hand. His knees were practically shaking. "Yes, sir," Julian stammered, his voice echoing weakly in the cavernous room. I am Julian Vance. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know my firm has defaulted on the covenants, but I can assure you with a restructuring plan, I can guarantee a massive return on your investment. I am not interested in your restructuring plan, Julian, a voice said. The voice was low. It was calm. It was chillingly familiar. Vanessa's heart stopped. The breath vanished from her lungs. She felt as though the obsidian floor had suddenly vanished, plunging her into an endless, terrifying freefall. The man by the window slowly turned around. The afternoon sunlight caught the sharp angles of his face, the cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes, and the tailored perfection of his charcoal suit. There was no faded flannel. There was no mild-mannered slouch. The aura of the man in front of them was so overwhelmingly powerful, it felt suffocating. It was Elias. Julian stopped talking mid-sentence. His mouth hung open, his eyes darting frantically from Elias's face to the massive desk, to the armed security standing quietly in the shadows. His brain completely short-circuited, unable to process the impossible reality standing before him. Elias, Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. Her legs gave out and she stumbled, catching herself on the back of a leather chair. Elias walked slowly toward the front of his desk. His footsteps were silent on the polished stone. He looked at Vanessa, then at Julian. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no sorrow. There was only the clinical detachment of a scientist observing microbes on a glass slide. "Hello, Vanessa," Elias said softly. The sound of his voice in this room of absolute power sent a violent shudder down her spine. "I see you brought the man who knows how to treat a woman." Julian's eyes widened in sheer unadulterated horror. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He looked at Vanessa, then back at Elias, the pieces falling into place with devastating, crushing clarity. "You," Julian gasped, stumbling backward. You are Aegis Global." Elias leaned casually against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "I am the founder and majority shareholder, yes. It seems your due diligence team at Vance Tech neglected to look beyond my very carefully constructed public pseudonym. A fatal error in this line of work." "No," Vanessa choked out, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. "No, this is a joke. You're a data analyst, Elias. You drive a Honda." Elias looked at her, tilting his head slightly. "I drove a Honda because it was reliable. I wore flannel because it was comfortable. And I pretended to be a normal working-class man because I wanted a wife who loved me for who I was, not for what I owned." Elias's voice dropped an octave, the temperature in the room seeming to plummet with it. "I gave you my heart, Vanessa. I gave you stability, loyalty, and everything a husband should give his wife. And you looked at me with disgust because I didn't drip with gold. Because I didn't flaunt my wealth like a peacock." He turned his gaze to Julian. Julian actually shrank back, raising his hands defensively as if Elias were about to strike him. "Julian Vance," Elias said, tasting the name like ash. "You walked into my home. You drank my bourbon. You threw pocket change on my coffee table and told me to get a hotel. You thought you were a titan stepping on a peasant." Elias stood up straight, his presence expanding to fill every corner of the massive room. "I built an empire from nothing. I dictate the flow of raw materials across 3 continents. I can bankrupt small nations before breakfast. And you?" Elias took a slow step forward, his eyes burning with an icy, merciless fire. "You are a parasite living on credit, a shiny hollow shell. And the moment you disrespected my home, I decided to step on you." Julian fell to his knees. The bespoke Tom Ford suit pulled around him on the black floor. He was sobbing, his pride completely annihilated. "Please," Julian begged, tears streaming down his face, his hands clasped together. "Please, Mr. Thorne. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know who you were. Take the firm. Take everything. Just call off the SEC. Don't send me to prison. Please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything." Elias stared down at the weeping, pathetic man before him. He felt absolutely nothing. "You don't negotiate with a landslide, Julian," Elias said softly. "You just get buried." Elias turned his eyes back to Vanessa. She was trembling uncontrollably, her makeup streaked with tears, her hands clutching her designer purse like a shield.